everyone. Welcome back to Roundtable by Meridian Australis, where we look at all things writing, publishing and bookselling in Australia. My name is Monte. I'm your host. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Woiwurrung and Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to any First Nations people who might be listening. Treaty. Now, I'm joined by wonderful author Rhett Davis, author of Hovering, as well as what we're here to talk about today, which is Arborescence, his latest and incredible book. Rhett, how are you going? Thanks for being here.
I'm very well. Thanks, Monty. Thanks for having me.
Oh, such a pleasure. Today's discussion will be about Arborescence, and we are going to be spoiling everything because we like to dig into the details. So if you haven't read Arborescence but you love Australian speculative fiction, I highly recommend you do. And I thought, Rhett, if you wanted to pitch Arborescence to anyone who's listening who might have thought, oh no, I'll listen to the podcast first. No, go read it first. Why should they read it, Rhett?
Okay, yeah, sure. So it's a couple of things. It's my 3-word pitch was always people become trees. That's 3 words.
We got there.
But the actual sort of longer pitch is that it's, or the longer sort of blurb is really that it starts with a couple, Bren and Kaylin, who are in their mid-20s, a bit lost in terms of where they want to be. Very much in love with each other, but still just not really sure what to do in their lives when they happen upon a video of people in a field pretending to be trees. And Kaylin is fascinated by this and sees some kind of direction that she might sort of head. So they head out together to investigate this group of people who are standing in a field sort of in the middle of southern Victoria somewhere pretending to be trees. And we will go into spoiler territory. That's normally where I end it, to be honest with you, because I can't spoil it, but we will. But we'll spoil it.
We're gonna spoil all of it. Look, I thought I wanted to start with sort of like an easy question, just sort of give you,
that's good,
like sort of easy onboarding to the whole conversation. So I thought I might just ask, what's your relationship to hope?
That's not easy. What is my relationship?
I think it's pretty easy.
Well, it's good. No, that's good. It's I mean, for me, everything as I've developed as a writer, I've realised that's the kind of writing I want to do. It's hopeful writing. I think my main reason for doing that is a reaction to so much of the dystopia, both in life, and it feels like quite a dystopian world we're in, but in fiction as well. And a lot of the sort of the consciousness of people feels quite dystopian in lots of ways. We fear the ending at the moment, and I get that, but I don't always agree that stories have to reflect exactly that. I think imagination and hope is how we get out of these problems, right? So that's my kind of default mode, is to sort of try and find ways, and obviously science fiction kind of ways and very absurdist ways in my case. So they're not real solutions, but I still think hopeful stories are where we need to start thinking a bit more.
I find that really interesting because I think, especially the first read-through of Arborescence, I felt personally like I almost had to fight off a little bit of the, maybe nihilism is the wrong word. I mean, I think at least from Bren's perspective, in the earlier parts of the book, when he is more kind of actively in denial, first about that it's happening, and then his stance sort of becomes, for quite a stretch, that it is just death. Or something like that. I found myself kind of having to quite consciously fight a similar kind of belief, and it is such a strange book because I think for so much of it and for so much of the reading experience, you could be tricked into thinking that it's not hopeful at all.
I agree, yeah.
And I love the way that you sort of frame, because we see Kaylin's obsession with arborescence, but the actual kind of arborescence sort of happens in the background in a lot of the book, because it really is first, it feels like a story between Bren and Kaylin, and there's sort of the the ending of the book is a story between Brent and his mum, which we'll get into later.
Yes. Yep.
But I sort of wanted to know, like, or ask you, where did that decision come from of how you would kind of bring in what feels like so much, not quite dread, but definitely this kind of like sort of overwhelming kind of negative spin to this thing that is happening. You have all of these questions throughout the book and debates about whether it's death, whether it's suicide, what it is doing to the planet, what it is doing to the people who are left behind by their arborescing family members or friends. Where did that come from? Was the tone like an early thing in the book, or was it idea first and then you had to find the right tone? Like sort of that kind of relationship between hope and despair. Where does that come from?
Well, I think the first thing I agree with you. There have been people that have said to me, this does not feel hopeful. Yeah. To be clear, but I think towards the end we start getting there. But honestly, it came out of. I mean, I was writing it in 2022 or something like that, 2023, and post all the things that were around that sort of era. And I mean, so I wasn't feeling good about things necessarily, but I was trying to write a way through that. I think I was feeling quite despairing about the world, and still we're still there, right? It's not that's different. But I was definitely trying to sort of push through that in some sort of way. And where the idea begins is really more of, I hadn't sort of planned to make it almost the kind of climate sort of fiction sort of thing that people have put it into. I sort of started just with I usually start with a fairly absurd idea. So this was just the people trees kind of thing. And this was an idea that had been in my head for a long time, that I'd done it in a couple of short stories that got published and in a few places, and it's never let me go. And I don't exactly know why that's the case, but I decided, look, this is the point where I need to make the big novel about it. So that idea is the start. And I had the image really of a woman, I wasn't sure who she was yet, in the backyard of a house. Happened to be a house in Melbourne that I know quite well in my head, but that's another thing. And just turning into a tree, and this other person going, what's going on? That's really where it started. So it sort of started as a sort of almost like a mourning kind of thing, like a grief sort of starting point. But when you come up with an idea like that, I'm not someone who maps it out very well. I try. I always fail at trying to plan my books. I just end up abandoning the plan every single time. So I see it as a bit of I start with the idea, and then it becomes a problem that I have to solve. Why is this happening, and why do we care? Yeah. People turning into trees, well, that's fun as an idea, and we can laugh at that or whatever. But it had to have some kind of reason and emotional kind of sort of impact to be useful. So as I was writing, past Brent and Kaylin, because I think they are, as you say, the core of the book, their relationship is very much the core. It is a love story, I think, at its core. But past their kind of relationship, what was this going to be about? And it ended up sort of being more of a story of a sort of loss and to some extent sacrifice. What are we prepared to kind of give up? Did I intend that? Not really. The intentions sort of change as I go through.
I have so many things to say. First, I really, really love the way you talk about sacrifice, and what I love about the book in general, but I think specifically in that relation to like, what are you giving up and what are you sacrificing? What are you leaving behind? You don't give a really clear answer, but I also don't feel like you kind of leave the reader hanging in a like, well, it's whatever you think. You strike this really, really beautiful middle ground between giving us a cold and hard kind of like answer to all of the really complex moral and emotional and societal questions throughout the book, in a way that I think you can only do because the story is ultimately so personal.
Yeah,
I think that's really beautiful. I will come back to, I think, the idea of grief, because I found that especially on the second read through, I picked it up a lot more. But first I wanted to ask actually on this you mentioned you sort of had this image of the woman in the backyard you didn't know. Now, I found it really interesting because when in my copy of the book, in the published edition that you buy off the shelf, before chapter 1, before the beginning of the book, right after the dedication, and then the Vonnegut quote, which I love, which we'll get back to.
That just came, anyway.
Yeah, I love it. We'll talk about Vonnegut in a sec. But you open with that excerpt from later on in the book of Bren and Travis in the backyard.
Yep.
And the first time I read this, I actually, because I work in book selling and I see a lot of books, it seemed to me to be like, I think as you see this in a lot of much older books, where there'll be an excerpt of a scene, of like a climactic scene kind of before chapter 1.
Yep.
And generally my assumption is that's like a publisher's decision or an agent's decision or whoever it is, it's probably not an author's decision. And it's like, look, this book gets really interesting if you keep reading. And then, and I sort of the first read through, I just chalked it up to, publisher decision. And I was like, okay, well, I can get over that. But then on the second, when I opened the book a couple of days ago to sort of start my second read, I went, I think this is Rhett's decision.
It was my decision,
yeah. And that's really interesting. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that was the first thing I wrote.
Wow.
I just picked up my notebook the other day from my Arborescence writing days, and it's the first page. And it hasn't changed that much. And I didn't know who these people were, so obviously we know who they are later on. Why did I do that? I still don't know why I put it at the front, other than just it was, I haven't thought about it since doing it, and it's a really interesting question. There was a sense that I had that I needed to establish something that wasn't going to happen for a while, and to keep a question in readers' minds before it was going to happen. Normally, I hate stuff like that. I really do. I don't like flashbacks. I don't like flash forwards. I'm not a huge fan of that as a technique. I think tell a story as it's happening. Yeah. But there was just something about it, and I think the image of it was so striking to me that I just felt that it kind of had to be there. And my publisher would just sort of said, yeah, that's great. I don't believe we had any more discussion than that. I don't think they pushed me to do it. I don't think so. I think I just did it. Yeah, no, it was all me. So it was, it was just really a chance of sort of instilling a bit of the strangeness a little bit early on, because I was a little bit worried to some extent, rightly or wrongly, that maybe I wouldn't. The early stages of the book aren't strange enough to know that there's something strange here. That is a little bit of a signpost for that, to say, look, something odd is going in here on here. Let's see where that goes, I guess. That was the idea, because I think I do try to ground the books a bit too, and not start too out there. But I was worried with this one, I think.
I'm so.
I could have done it without it, to be honest.
Well, see, but that's the thing, because I usually don't like stuff like that either. And as I said, on the first read, I wasn't sure about it. But then opening the book for the second time, knowing where it goes, I felt like, oh, this is actually really, it's the exception that proves the rule. Like, this actually really, really worked for me. Oh, great. And I was kind of confused about it, because I didn't expect it to work on me, because I'm a bit similar. I'm kind of like, if you need a flashback, why you shouldn't. Well, there are always exceptions, but it's for me, or flash forward. I tend to get a little bit over them. We overuse them, I think, is the thing. Totally. I think I normally don't do any of that sort of stuff. I'm a bit careful, but I really felt it needed it, and I don't know. It was almost just instinctive, I think, more than anything else. Yeah. Yeah, it was very interesting. That really stuck out to me as so beautiful.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to something I actually heard you say at the panel at the, I want to say, Geelong Writers' Week. I could be misremembering the name of the event.
The local word festival in Geelong, yes.
You said a few great things that I was really interested in diving into. You said that you like books that misbehave. I think there's a whole 2-hour kind of conversation we could have about genre and categorization, and there are a lot of questions asked about that. Are you happy with this book being called speculative fiction?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm never happy with any genre
right.
classification, but I know why we have them.
Yeah, because then I find it really interesting because your book is shelved in general fiction and readings. It's not in the sci-fi, fantasy, or speculative space.
No, I was just up at Hill of Content actually, and it's in the literary, it's in the fiction space, not the sci-fi space. And that always interests me. I don't quite understand why, but I also kind of it's really just what the booksellers need to do to sell it, I guess. That's the way I kind of see it. But I do get, it never always settles easily, I think. I know that I'm doing something that's sort of cross-genre, and as a lot of writers are these days, I think there's a real, particularly in the science fiction, literary fiction space, there's a lot of books across that space.
So much crossover, and so much like, I think there's actually two different conversations happening, and they use the same words and phrases, and that's why it gets really confusing, because there's genre in terms of like describing what the contents of the book are, and then there's genre, which is your category on your bookshelf in the bookstore. And I think the best way to describe a book like this, like what's in it, if I was like actually describing it to someone, I think because it's I wouldn't quite call it science fiction. No. I wouldn't quite call it fantasy. I'd maybe call it magical realism, but there's also there is a sci-fi sort of element to the world building. And so speculative is kind of this catch-all, maybe it's a little bit broad, but in terms of like when we're talking about bookshelf categories, who will buy this? I think the person who's reading Arthur C. Clarke is probably a lot less likely to buy this than the person who's reading like, I don't know if you know any Max Porter or Grace Chan or something like that, like other sort of Aussie speculative authors. It's interesting. I feel like a lot of the confusion comes out of the fact that we're actually using the same words to talk about two different things. Like, are we talking
it is interesting,
genre or category? You know?
Yeah, and I sort of I go back to sort of, I mean, classic sort of stuff like Kafka, or even go back to sort of Gogol, Nikolai Gogol, unbelievable writer. Yeah. One of my favourite stories, full stop, is The Nose, where it's I can't exactly remember the exact details of it, but it's the nose. The guy's nose goes off his face, and basically there's a court case against him or something along those lines. Anyway, it's ludicrous. Yeah. But it's like 19th century, early 19th century, I think Gogol might have been. Doesn't matter. The point is, there's been sort of these sort of stories for a long, long time, going back even further than that. We do what we would call speculative fiction is just fiction.
Yes, exactly.
And that's kind of, I get why we've had to come up with these categories and define it and to sell it. But I really think if people were a bit more open in their reading across, I put literary fiction people and science fiction people in the same category. We should be reading across all these things and not limiting ourselves to genre. That's the big thing for me.
I mean, we did a whole, last year we were, Meridian was at the Emerging Writers Festival, and I did a whole presentation about something is genre until it's good enough to be considered literary, and then suddenly it's not genre. Like talk about like Frankenstein or Dracula, all the way back to all these amazing original kind of literary titans, which are shelved in classics or in general fiction, like 1984, Brave New World, The Handmaid's Tale. Are all in general fiction. Yeah. And it's sort of
because they've reached some sort of critical mass for some reason.
Exactly. They're too cool for the genre shelves, which is like such a I hate that.
Which is silly. It's so silly. It's very silly.
But in contemporary, I think especially contemporary Australian fiction, as you say, so many people are blurring the lines more and more and more. And you can sort of tell that the publishers and the industry is a little confused about where to put them, because they're just all sort of throwing all of these authors into literary fiction because that's the catch-all, because otherwise they don't really know how to distinguish between these people who are using really speculative imaginative techniques versus someone who's writing maybe more realism, and it's sort of all just getting shoved in the big, like, here's all the literary fiction, it's got everything, like
and I think that's the case, particularly. I don't know every single big publisher in Australia, but I think that a lot of the big publishers don't really have a really, really clear I agree, a really clear knowledge of where to put something like my book anyway. And I get put in the literary fiction space, and that's fine. That suits me to some extent, I think. But I think it does, every genre does limit sometimes. I do wonder about whether the Australian publishers could be doing a little bit more in the more speculative spaces and being a bit more like targeting those spaces a bit more, because there's a lot of good stuff out there, as we know.
I mean, I think from first-hand experience, like there's so many amazing speculative writers, and I think of all generations and perspectives as well. Like you've got people in their 50s and 60s writing amazing Australian speculative fiction, and people in their 20s writing incredible, amazing fiction, and
people are hungry for it. Readers are hungry for it, and I don't think they've really. I'm not critiquing anything in particular, but I do think publishers could might find that people are really hungry for it if they did a good job of it, I think. But
I think one of the things we've noticed at Meridian is like all of these people come out of the woodwork and just say, "Oh my God, we're so happy to have found a collective that focuses on speculative fiction."
Yep.
Like I've been wanting something like this for 10 years, you know, and then sort of just goes, "Well, we just assumed no one was doing it because it couldn't be done because it was a bad idea," and then it just we're doing it, and then it's been 3 years, and it's like, oh well, this was a good. Just nobody was doing it.
People actually really like this, and people just went, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very quite a pleasant surprise. So you like books that misbehave, which I think your book definitely does.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
You also talk about sidestepping reality because it's difficult to grapple with, and I thought this is a really interesting jumping off point because there's a real mix of real world and created sort of culture in this book. I mean, you mentioned The Lord of the Rings, watching Kaylin and Bren watch The Lord of the Rings together. I wanted to ask which version. Did they watch all 3 Peter Jackson movies in one day? Did they watch the Ralph Bakshi animated version?
Maybe they watched the animated one.
Okay. I thought
that's what I but no, I definitely they were watching the modern Peter Jackson take. I did watch that rotoscope, was it rotoscope version? Whatever it was.
So.
You probably got the name of it right. And it finishes at after the Fellowship, doesn't it? I think it finishes halfway through or something, and it just stops. They didn't do another one. It's weird.
That was a
doesn't quite
strange
work.
era for fantasy.
It was. And for a long time, that's what we thought. That's going to be the best you get, right? Because it's too hard to film. And then
we got one of the best trilogies ever.
Absolutely. And no, they're definitely watching The Two Towers at the end of Helm's Deep, where the Fangorn Forest and the Ents of... Well, the whole forest, actually. I think Fangorn Forest just envelops the orcs as they retreat, which is the most spine-tingling kind of part of... I mean, there's a lot of spine-tingling moments in that trilogy that was done so well, but that to me was big.
Very visceral.
And, you know, so that's definitely driven a lot of that.
Yeah. The other one that jumped out to me was the mention of Arthur's Seat. The mountain on the way down to the peninsula or the hill or whatever it is.
No, that was actually in Scotland. That was in Edinburgh. That's the Arthur's Seat is in Edinburgh.
Wow, because there is an Arthur's Seat in Victoria. Yeah, I remember from driving down to the peninsula when I was a kid. I remember it because there was no possessive apostrophe on the sign. It's Arthur's ARTHURS, no apostrophe,
no one owns
seat.
It. No one's this. Yep. Okay.
And I remember that infuriating me. I was a very annoying 9-year-old. Okay, so there we go.
Well, you know your apostrophes though. That's good.
Yeah. I drew.
It was. So they were in Edinburgh, and I'm assuming Arthur's Seat in Mornington was named after Arthur's Seat in Scotland. Like everything
in Australia.
Yeah, just about. Yeah, but so that's the seat that looks out, or the hill that looks out over Edinburgh. I guess quite a big sort of. Quite an impressive location, Edinburgh generally, but that's,
Because then you have all of these references that aren't real in our world. You have Investigatore Polizia, which was one of my favourite. There was also, the kayaking Ben or something.
Yeah, so,
the archipelago of sin, was that it?
Yes, no, oh my goodness, this is my favourite part of the book, and I forget his name.
Davey.
Catamaran Davey.
He
has a catamaran and he solves crimes on some sort of archipelago somewhere. I don't know. It's kind of like something between Magnum PI and, Knight Rider or Airhawk, or one of those 80s kind of... That was in my head anyway. I really enjoy coming up with really silly kind of pop culture references that are not real. I don't know why. Investigatore Polizia was for me, somewhere between Midsummer Murders and Inspector Rex, which was an Italian murder mystery show with the dog. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No,
it's a German Shepherd and a detective, and they solve crimes. So those things were together somehow.
That's amazing.
I just like making that sort of stuff up. It's a lot of fun.
I loved reading all of them. I think we should circle back to the Kurt Vonnegut quote at the beginning, because you have Voidstar in this book, which I'm so drawn to it. For me, Voidstar was just a lot of Doctor Who. I grew up as a massive Doctor Who kid, like obsessively rewatching the whole series time and time and time again. And what I like about Voidstar is you have Voidstar, and then you have the author, the creator of Voidstar, and we get to see him retrospect Irving Shrike.
Yes, that's him.
This came across to me as very much an homage to Vonnegut's Kilgore Trout, kind of like the self-insert author.
Absolutely, yeah, there's a bit of that. Yep.
Where it's never too much, but there are moments where I really feel like it's as close as you, Rhett, get to speaking in the novel when we get a couple of Irving Shrike interviews.
There's a couple of little lines in there that are pretty close. There's one line in particular that I think for me sums up what the theme of the novel that he says. I think it's I don't remember what it is. It's something about life. But yeah, look, he's certainly the Voidstar stuff was interesting because it was almost like a side exercise I was doing. It wasn't really related to the book. I was just, when I was getting stuck, I would often do kind of like a bit of a short story exercise or something like that, and just little vignettes of things. And I realised there is a reference to Voidstar in Hovering as a science fiction show that one of the characters watches, and it's one of the many kind of iterations of the show that's come up after this comic book series. And I as I was writing these little side stories, I wanted to see what it would look like if I shoved it in there, and I did that to begin with, and there wasn't initially a link. But as I went through, I was realising, and writing a little bit more of them, I realised what it was really a way that Bren is kind of interpreting the world, and the way this world is kind of, he's been so influenced by his childhood reading, which we all probably are, that this is now becoming the way he's seeing how the world will go. That's kind of where, and it sort of informs his worldview, I think, in a way.
I found the paragraph.
It's quite late in the
I'm
book,
not going to read the whole thing, but I think like the one line that I love that I think is so simple is, that's what I was writing about. That's what Voidstar is, life answering itself, which comes after all of these vignettes where Voidstar is asked questions by all of these various creatures, entities, people, civilizations that they encounter, and always the answer is not direct, shall we say.
Yes, annoyingly not direct.
Annoyingly not direct, and very sort of very deep and esoteric and existential and all of the fun things. And I every time we got a Voidstar excerpt, when I was reading the book, especially the second time, I was just so excited.
I'm delighted to hear that, because it's quite strange. I often get stuff like this where like not everyone's appreciates that, and I like that you did. I think for some people it doesn't feel as linked, but for me it actually really is. I think it's just quite a subtle link that maybe, and I love little vignettes anyway, and little short stories within stories are I find that really a rich thing to do, and kind of when I encounter them, I love them. So why wouldn't I try and do them as well? But yeah, I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it. It was definitely something that. It was almost, in some ways, it was coming from almost an automatic writing kind of place. That's really where some of those sort of things can start for me, which was interesting. I didn't think I would end up pushing it in there, but I did.
And it just fit.
Just in the end, yeah. I had to sort of work it through a little bit and do some work on it, but it mostly fit.
I think specifically what you said about sort of Bren's interpretation of the world and the way I love the way he relates back to Voidstar. It seems to happen quite a lot when there's a particular kind of difficulty or confusion in his life or a conflict. And then there's also that kind of fun through line of like, he loves to watch and think about shows like whether it's Investigatoria Polizia or something else. And he loves to sort of like, while he's watching something with Kaylin, kind of talk about X, Y, and Z circumstances about the show or how it came about, or and I love that. I love a character who, like me, is like a media analysis nerd.
Definitely, yeah.
And
doesn't always get it right.
He's also always at the wrong time.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You shouldn't be doing that when you're watching it with your partner.
Exactly.
Like, write a little essay,
just be quiet. Just watch the show. Yeah.
Which I love. I love Bren. I think Bren is very interesting because he feels, at certain points, quite removed from what is happening, because Kaylin is the one who's obsessed with Arborescence. Kaylin is the one who's dragging them around the world. Kaylin is the one who then, when they split up, is spending all the time kind of studying Arborescence. But I never felt like he was really passive in the way that uni writing lecturers and professors tell you to never make your character passive. You know, he never felt like that. Did you were you conscious of like the difficulty of writing the line there of this character who's kind of, he's not detached, but he's very internal, he's very quiet. He says multiple times that he doesn't have his meaning. Like, he doesn't know what his life.
And I think ultimately one of the things here is for him to sort of get to a point where he does have some sort of sense of what he's there for and what the world is about. But I think going back to that question, I had originally seen Bren, weirdly enough, it's an old book, but I still love the Great Gatsby and the style of the Great Gatsby more than anything else. The lyricism of the Great Gatsby is really genuinely some of the best sort of writing still out there. I think it's beautifully done.
And observant narrator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the idea of, because what I loved about Gatsby when I was reading it was not necessarily the story itself in some ways. There was a relationship between Nick and Gatsby. And I think Nick, whatever you want to see it as, is basically in love with Gatsby at some level, right? Platonically or not, however you want to interpret it. It's a beautiful interpretation of someone, and it is very much a neutral. Nick is a very neutral person. He hasn't. There's a bit of sort of stuff that he does, but it's mostly other people that are doing the things. Yeah. And I really wanted to see if I could do that in a sort of, a heterosexual relationship. With the dude kind of just being that person and being that kind of supportive partner sort of role, but also struggling with it a bit. In his own way. So that was where it started, and I hadn't thought so much about the passivity, but yes, that is something that as I went through it needed to be. I wasn't quite sure if I was going to stick with Kaylin, to be honest with you. I was potentially going to move over to her and back again, but I decided that I just thought what's going on with her is too big, and it probably might lose the thread a little bit, and I wanted to just sort of, okay, we've had this big explosion. Now what's he going to do about it? We know where she's going. At some level, but his kind of journey here could go downhill from here. We don't know. So I ended up sticking with him, but I was definitely I was umming and ahhing about that quite a bit.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question. Was there ever a point in the draft where you were considering being in Kaylin's head at a certain point? Because I can imagine that it's such a tempting prospect as an author when you make this character who's competent, full of energy and attitude, and has this really beautiful personality, and very flawed, obviously. And she's also in the thick of things. She's doing like she's in the heart of, I guess, the plot of the book, if you want to put that in air quotes. And the choice to stay with Bren feels so deliberate and very, very powerful. And I think it really puts you in touch with what, like, the fallout, not on a big sci-fi scale of like, how do we stop the world arborescing? It's like, how do you live as a human in a world that's arborescing? And
that quiet science fiction, or whatever you want to call it, is my jam, right? Like that, where it is, I'm as on board with big explosions and whatever else, but where I think speculative fiction is particularly powerful is in those quieter moments sometimes, where something really strange is happening, whatever it might be, and we have to think about the human existence and humanity. So that was, I'd always intended to go back to him at some level in that reflective sort of sense, but I wasn't sure if it would be for the whole book. I did think about going with her, but I think that was the right decision in the end. I think to sort of, because then it becomes a much more, it becomes much more about the human themes rather than her journey. We've sort of seen her journey to that extent, but it's really much more about the loss and all the other stuff that goes on, and someone contending with that.
I sort of want to move on towards that. You said that you like metaphors in this Geelong panel that I listened to, and you said, I think you said you were saying it to your dad, that the book was a tree, and that each page or each word were leaves,
right,
and the whole book's the tree.
Yep.
And I wanted to sort of parry with my own sort of take on the metaphor, because throughout the book, it's really slow and meandering, and when you brought up the tree metaphor, I thought there's this real kind of gentle like unfurling of the leaves of the tree that is this book. For so much of the story, it feels like very gradual and very delicate and meandering, and then at some point you stop and you look back at the book you're reading, and you go, actually so much has happened. And so, you sort of get to this point where like, and then suddenly there's just, in one line, there's millions of people who've arboresced. And then I probably like 70 pages before that, Bren was still in denial about arborescence being a thing. And it has this kind of real quiet propulsion behind it, which I find really beautiful and very arresting in a way. Like you float through the book, and because you float in a way that is not super tethered, you don't realize how quickly you're moving because you're not along the ground. You're sort of floating through the sky, and you don't realize that you're going at 100 miles an hour. And this is really beautiful. I just sort of like a quick question about like the pacing. Like, did you know what you were doing? Like, not as in but were you aware? Was it a plan? Were you aware of that effect, or was it just you sort of the writing just comes? You have to figure out how you get there.
Do you ever know what you're doing is the question. I think you never really know what you're doing. However, there were a few things that I was conscious of doing as I was doing it. So the tree leaf metaphor was probably a vague attempt to explain to my father what I was trying to do, and I don't really know if it worked. But anyway,
it's cute.
But I think the what was more about, we were talking about time and the way we're kind of suddenly moving forward, and we don't really know exactly how long between passages. One of the things I was trying to do there quite consciously was have quite almost a staccato sort of approach so a fragmentary sort of approach where, there are some long passages, but they're mostly interspersed between some quite short sections that are just going from moment to moment in these people's lives, and you don't really know the distance of time between them. I've
every now and then you drop a character age in there, and that's
there'll be something. You've got it goes through 20 years effectively in the whole thing, but so you still know where you are in the overall scheme of things. But I read that was coming from Jenny Offal's sort of Department of Speculation or Olga Tokarczuk's Flights, both sort of books that kind of do that fragmentary thing really well. And what I wanted to sort of look at there was what I love about, particularly Jenny Offal's book, and what I was trying to sort of do a little bit with this was to give a real sense of expansiveness between those passages. So you could do some really short pieces and then have space between them that almost expand. It's a weird effect that sort of happens when you do short pieces kind of one after the other. It seems to expand the time in a weird way and does some strange things to your head, as opposed to sort of just a chapter that's just all one big section. The space between these sections was really something that I wanted to do, and it suits my brain a little bit. I think as I'm writing, I'm increasingly struggling to sort of write long pieces and read, for that matter, long pieces that don't sort of have pauses in there. So that was the idea, and I think hopefully that's what you're talking about there, is that expansiveness of the time sort of feels maybe that's where that was going anyway.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I just found that so interesting because it wasn't what I expected when I picked up the book for the first time, but then you just so immediately get pulled into this rhythm it's staccato is an interesting word because it is staccato, but at the same time it's very fluid.
It's not quite staccato. You're right. It's a bit more sort of
I think it's a great word because sort of section to section, it does work like that. But then you sort of the book's in 4 or 5 parts.
Yeah, I think 5.
And you get to the end of a part and you go, wow. Oh my God. Like I took this book, the first time I read it, I took it camping, and it was one of those things where like I was camping for 5 days, took a few books, but I was kind of just like, well, I'm just going to read Arborescence probably. Well, I'm going to have time to read. And then I literally read 2/3 of the book in one night, woke up the next morning and like I fell asleep reading it because I couldn't put it. And then I woke up the next morning and like just finished it. And it was like I made breakfast really late. I was really hungry because I was just reading the book.
Well, that's lovely. Yeah.
And I was so pleasant. I always love when a book kind of unexpectedly pulls me in and makes me finish it in 1 or 2 sittings. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke is another one.
Wonderful book.
Which is
wonderful book. And I did the same thing with that. That was just, I couldn't put it down.
You just can't stop.
No. She's got a gift.
I've got Jonathan Strange next to my bed, but that's a whole...
It's a whole nother thing. I will go there one day, but not lately. Yeah.
And then the other one I always think about is Lanny by Max Porter. I'm not sure if you've read that.
Yes, I have read that one. That's great too.
Beautiful book. And another one, I read that in one sitting and I didn't expect to, but it just went like that. But sort of the second half of my question about the feeling I had it being both meandering and slow, but also really kind of quick and propulsive, was especially the second read through. I got to the final sections with Bren back at home with his mum, and that kind of real quietness. And you mentioned in the Geelong panel that this was a book about grief.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you didn't really realise that until you'd finished the first draft and you sort of sat back and looked at it. But for me, as a reader, as soon as we get to that point, it all falls into place. And in my head, I go, well, this is the only place the book could have ended up.
Yeah.
Is in this backyard, as you know, in the segment from the very beginning, as you say, like in this backyard with this woman standing there, arborescing. And it really surprised me the first time through because there's so much like big stuff. There's the canon stuff, there's the AI stuff, which we haven't even talked about yet, but there's a whole angle to the
another
book.
Thing. Yep.
But I just sort of thought back to Bren's dad dies quite early on in the book, and then there's that moment at the funeral where he sees his mum and he says that her burden has disappeared, but she doesn't look freer or happier. She looks just tired, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's very beautiful. So when you sort of sat back after that first draft and had that sort of a little bit of a realization, I've got a couple questions, but
sure.
How much, once you realised that's what the book was about, how much rewriting did you need to do to get it to the point where it's at now, where it feels it feels like it is the answer to the book's question, is that this is where we end up, versus was a lot of that just already there?
I don't think it was. I think of that, as I said, that image of the woman becoming the tree was there at the start, but what that was for, I didn't really know. And even just the sense that it would be loss. And a grief that would go with that. I mean, yes, they're transforming into another living creature of some kind, or being, or whatever entity, but that's not us. You've lost that person, right? Yeah. That is what that is. And so I'd hinted at it a little bit. So I knew that the father was probably had Alzheimer's and was probably going to not make it through the book. But there were more components to that I realised that I needed to add to as I realised. I mean, it probably took me until I actually got to that scene in the backyard, as I was writing it, probably about 3/4 of the way through, and I got to that scene. That's when I think I realised that's what it was about. Yeah. I knew it was coming up. I wasn't sure what it was there for. Yeah. And then I put them in there after they'd sort of, I can't remember exactly where it is, but it was. I think it was as I was writing it in there, and I was just taking notes that I'd already done, and okay, this is where it fits. Oh,
Gotcha.
Okay, so that's what that is. And then there needed to be a little bit more of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it really just became a link to everything else that's going on in the world. And people sort of, the link with people actually experiencing this grief everywhere anyway, which is obviously something we all have in life anyway.
Yeah.
But it was just a sort of a way of getting sort of Bren in that sort of space too.
Yeah.
It's that's part of the joy for me of writing. Full stop, is to know what I think. I mean, that's a bit of a cliche, but it really is. I think I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
That's the best part, is to discover it, right?
Yeah. No, I was really interested to sort of, after hearing you speak about it a little bit, and then going back through and reading the book again, and going, I think this is also sort of beautifully sewn,
thank you.
pun intended. That kind of thread throughout, and then of course there's the moment where Bren starts to arboresce, and then we have that sort of conversation with him and Kaylin at the very end.
Yep.
And she kind of confesses that, like, once it was you, I couldn't handle it anymore. And that is like such a beautiful, I think, it's not quite a conclusion, but it's a beautiful point for the book to arrive at, in terms of Kaylin as this very ambitious, very talented, perhaps maybe too talented, and sort of like too good at, I think Bren says she's very good at being good at things.
Yes.
And she's swept up in something that she is really good at and also really interested in, and sort of that carries her and carries her and carries her all throughout this huge sort of part of the book and part of her life that we don't see directly, as we've talked about, for a lot of it. But that coming back to her realising arborescence means that she wouldn't get to talk to Bren again, and that being too much for her, I find really interesting.
It was interesting. I sort of had a vague sense, if we go back to, and I'll have to bring it up because I haven't been able to talk about this because of spoilers, right? But which is great. Had a vague sense, and it's not the same thing, but I had a vague sense of Gatsby's green light at the end of the book. The idea that there's this deep flaw in this human that she just can't get past. So she's effectively, when she's doing that, she's being a hypocrite, right? She's completely going against everything she said, that this is a good thing, this is going to help us, all that sort of stuff for everyone else. But when it's coming to me and what I want, not so much. And it's taken that to make her realise that, I guess. And that was sort of the thinking behind it. It's obviously not the same sort of thing as Gatsby, but I had this idea of just her this sort of flaw in her, I guess, that kind of she can't really let go. But I also don't want to, with those kind of things, I never want to be didactic with any of these things and just say this is she was wrong and he was right and blah blah blah. It's up to people to kind of decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Really, it's a tough moral question, I guess, there that I don't answer.
The first read through got really angry at Bren when he started to arboresce.
Yep.
And then the second time, even though I knew he was going to be cured or reversed or whatever. Yep. Even though I knew so the arborescence wouldn't be completed, I still had this kind of like I was much more at peace with the idea of him leaving and becoming a tree, and I don't really know why that shifted, because the first read through it made me I was really distraught, and it did, because it felt like he was leaving me. It's just a strange thing to say about a book character.
No, of course.
You know, and I do think the reason I asked you that very first question about hope is I find this entire book to be so gripping because the question is so fundamental. And I like my relationship with it, I think, because I'm 24, Gen Z.
Sure.
Yeah, and sort of for me, I think the first time as well, my emotional reaction to arborescing was I fell very squarely into Bren's kind of no, it's suicide camp. And I think part of me still is close to that.
Sure.
I think because the state of the world, as we've talked about, is so, just as you mentioned, is so dystopian, and there's kind of so many horrible things happening, and it seems like our trajectory is getting more and more worrying.
Yes.
And for a lot of last year, for a lot of 2025, and I think the first parts of 2026, I was very kind of existentially overwhelmed with the world. And I sort of just finished, or was finishing, and then just finished my undergraduate degree in uni. Had been nothing like all of the generations before me said uni was like. It wasn't this kind
Completely
of like propulsive, inspiring intellectual space. It was very just all this kind of like all emails and online classes and AI checkers and all, and it's just all, so much of not what I thought it was or what I wanted. And then I came out of uni with a creative writing degree, so it's very employable.
Of course,
and
yes. We all are, aren't we?
Yes, yeah, we are. And then I think I really had to sort of fight and claw my way back to have some level of hope about the future, whether or not it's particularly realistic about the state of the world. Like, I got to a point where I just couldn't get out of bed and not have a little bit of faith.
Got to have something.
And so for me, like, it's such a beautiful, twisted, mean book, because it's like the arborescence and there's like the tension in Caitlin is like, this thing is so amazing and beautiful, and there's all these amazing things happening to the world, that like the world is healing, like the sort of like you talk about the emissions in the book, that sort of what arborescence has done to the atmosphere is so good. But then it's still fundamentally, I think, on one level, feels like some kind of checking out.
Yes, I agree.
And I sat with for a long time. I was like, would I arboresce? And I was like, no. I want to fight too much. But then would I be upset if people I knew? I would obviously be upset. Would I judge them?
Would you go, what would you do that for?
Would I condemn them? And I think that's a really interesting question. George has this line, the guy who hires Bren to look after the trees near the end. Bren says it's not grief. It's just after his mum's arborest. It's not grief. And George says, but it's pretty much the same, or something like that, or it's similar. And there's another line where it's like, they don't die, and then George says, yeah, but that's not how it feels for us. Like, there's this kind of couple of these little lines where it's just the real complexity and the nuance behind this action, which is so beautiful and conscious and warm, and at the same time is about stepping back from responsibility. Yes. Or maybe it's taking the ultimate responsibility.
That's the thing. Is it actually doing that? I mean, and yes, I think there's a good argument for both of those things, right? So you could argue that it is giving up completely, that actually arborescing is checking out. But in checking out, do they do a good thing?
Exactly.
And when millions / billions of people do it, is that a good thing? Well, not for people around them, but for the planet, probably. Yeah. So it's not a question you can just go, yep, that's what it is. Yeah. And for me, the idea of giving up, I wanted to sort of be clear that it wasn't that yes, people are going to be some people that would think that about it, that it is giving up, of course, and that it's getting into sort of fairly dark places there. But I wanted to also present the alternate view as well, that it's just mostly not, and it's mostly not that people are overwhelmingly saddened by the world, which is understandable, but more that they're looking to, what is good for the world as a whole, and what is good for life on this planet. And this planet generally, right? Yeah. And so I understand where people come from there, because there was a bit of it's not really just saying one way or the other, but for me that's where the hopefulness actually comes from. The fact that people would do this, which I don't think they would in real life. Most people probably wouldn't. Maybe if you're getting old, perhaps, but certainly not to the extent they do in the book. that's really where that went.
It's has stayed with me the whole time since I read it the first time. And every time I lend the book to someone, I had to go scramble and pick up my copy of the book from a friend of mine earlier this week because I realised I'd lent it to them. And I was like, where's my copy of Arborescence? I need to reread it by Thursday. I texted like 4 different friends. I was like, do you have my copy of Arborescence? Like, no. Yes.
Where's it gone?
God.
Where's it gone?
Yeah, I found it. But she read it and she like, similar to me, I think, like sped through it unexpectedly and was just like, oh my God, I'm completely obsessed with I think lovely. I'm really kind of the reason I had my whole kind of like spiel about like my personal place in the world and sort of relationship to hope is I think what I find really interesting is that this feels like such a book for particularly my generation. Like, which I'm not sure like if that was planned at all or intended at all or that's what you're thinking about, but like as someone who, you know, I was raised and grew up just in that era of technology changing fundamentally. You know, like when I was 4 and 5, we had Aladdin on cassette, on like video. And I remember like rewinding that and getting ready to watch it every night and being so excited about the fact I got to rewatch Aladdin again or the first Pokemon movie or whatever it was. And then I had Doctor Who on DVDs. And then by the time I was in high school, like social media, streaming, everything was so different. And it's so interesting. Things have changed so quickly and we are barely, if at all, keeping up with everything that is changing.
It is,
and for me, this book was so important because it fully acknowledges the tone and the atmosphere of the world that we are in, and it made me and my experience, I think, feel really seen in a way that I hadn't really encountered in a lot of really beautiful speculative fiction, even a lot of fiction written by people in my generation. I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, as an embittered Gen Xer, I'm delighted that it's that it's sort of speaking to Gen Z or whoever else really. It's definitely wasn't planned that way, but certainly there's a slowing down element in the book that I was very conscious of putting in there. So the pace of the world for your generation's experience that I've sort of seen, obviously the whole journey to that moment, pre-internet and everything, and it's in particular since social media, it's just the pace has been outrageous, really, in terms of it's very hard to keep up with generally. And so there was an element of just sort of wanting things to slow down as a writer at that point as well. So I think that was infused in the book, really, to be honest with you. I'm just like, you know what? I don't want this as much.
Well, because there's this through line of the Q and the sort of the tech like setting and the alternative intelligences and that kind of whole thread, which the first time I read it, I was slightly concerned because I was like, I don't want this to be a book about AI, you know? And then the way you handle it, it does feel like it's like Bren chooses to step back and slow down, and then there's no kind of like plot mechanics resolution to like the AI stuff or the tech advancement stuff, because it just becomes not part of Bren's life anymore. And I thought that was just like the only way I think you could have handled the inclusion of all of that stuff. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, certainly.
Because you said you work in tech or business.
I do work in tech, in sort of I work as a business analyst at the moment in sort of tech. It's an area I know quite well at some level, and that's been my kind of paid gig for a long time. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's like the Cube, but it's not dissimilar in some cases. It can feel existentially a little bit difficult or a little bit meaningless at times, that kind of work. The AI stuff was really just pushing the kind of absurdist, slightly vaguely dystopian kind of angle a little bit to sort of see where I could go with that, to be honest. I do like putting lots of jokes in things and lots of like humorous situations, and whether they're funny or not is another question, but I do sort of like pushing it a little bit. And the idea of AI getting to the point, which it probably isn't far away from anyway, where it's employing people, is something that just delighted me as an idea. But even more than that, to have a very mean AI effectively employing Bren was very much a thing that I did quite late in the end, and because I was like, what is this? What is any of this AI stuff here for? And I wanted to sort of almost put a little punchline on that whole thing. It's more than a punchline, but and that's just sort of something that I just went with a little bit. He needed to sort of have another element to himself, I think, that was sort of bouncing off some of the more natural stuff. Really, though, it comes down to a little bit of there are lots of kind of axes in this book, right? Like sort of, and one of them is tech versus nature. Yeah. And that's really the balancing act. There's a little bit of a seesaw going on there between that and him moving towards, touching grass, so to speak, is really where he ends up landing, and in a good way. Like I think that's really where he never really likes the work that he's doing for this sort of this company that he works for, but
he's somewhat content in it for quite a while.
He's quite content. He's got a job, and that's all that matters as far as he's concerned. He's doing fine. But I kind of like the idea of upending him and just seeing where that went, and so that sort of it's all these themes that you don't realize you're writing about at the time, I think, that end up kind of being, as I say, infused in it.
There's that particular scene towards the end where Umlaut shows up with no battery.
Yes.
And Bren almost, and he says this, I wasn't sure if I was leaving Umlaut to die or not, because I wasn't sure if Umlaut could die. But then he does plug Umlaut back in.
Yes.
Was there ever a point where he let Umlaut die? Did you ever entertain that?
No, not really. Because well, maybe a little bit. I mean, I didn't want that to be too... I mean, the fact is he's not going to last much longer, right? And so I was just like, look, it's a little kindness, and he's not a mean person. So I kind of felt that would be the wrong approach, but with him.
I don't know if this was intentional, but it reminded me of the scene from earlier when Kaelin and Bren drive past the rabbit.
Yes.
And the rabbit's in the middle of the road.
Yep.
Head in its paws.
Yeah, head in its paws, knowing that it's going to get hit. And I've actually that was drawn from real life. Believe it or not, I was driving sort of somewhere, and this little rabbit just came out on the road in this middle of it. This big highway, and it just. Well, I passed it. I didn't hit it, but it was sitting there in the middle of the road with its head in its paws, and it was the most tragic thing It was just because it was just another few seconds. And it was just like, oh, I'm done. Yeah. And so that feeling of that moment with his and that's something that I think Bren has got a lot about him as well. He discovers his sort of real humanity, I think, or his care towards other people and other creatures, I think, is something that really is infused with him as well. So that was definitely something that was driving the compassion, I think, from his point of view, sort of, and maybe that's sort of a bit of a counterpoint to Kaelin, a bit like that, I think. Yeah,
they have this great kind of philosophical push and pull, which I find really compelling, which also I feel is it is very realistic, the way their relationship dynamic works and the way it develops. A lot of you talked about this, like a lot of this book is so funny, and I feel like a lot of it is because you let Bren be really fun. Like Bren is quite fun. It's not just you, the author, kind of making jokes in the way that like narrative jokes. Like it's also like it's in text. Yes, he's like quite just like an and sometimes it's at the wrong time and sometimes it's not that funny. But Kaelin has that great sentence towards the beginning about, I know you're trying to be funny and unhelpful to distract me, but that's actually very insightful, which I love. It's one of my favorite lines because it's just so simple and it's so real and human. And I noticed it on the second time through. I was like, this book is really funny, but it's not in a way that ever breaks the really mournful tone.
They're not, and they're not jokes as such, I suppose. I do say they're jokes, but they're not really. They're certainly not jokes. They're more his kind of cynical observations about the world more than anything else. And what I delight in doing, and particularly in that book, was having a moment of kind of, and I do like this generally in whatever I read and whatever stories I consume, but the going from dark to light very, very abruptly is quite is compelling to me. So the idea of having quite a reflective, melancholy moment, and then suddenly, he says something about. It's a bit silly, but one of the things his cat has taught him is to that it's okay to get excited about having a shit, and that's the next line after this kind of reflective piece. I love that kind of that sort of movement between melancholy and lightness. I just find that very, very entertaining to write, but also to read. So I find that really amplifies both. It kind of just goes back between both. That's the way I like to do it. But yeah,
because I think it makes the people in the book, the characters, feel so human that then when bad stuff or when difficult stuff happens to them, you really buy it because they're more developed and they're more realised.
Well, I mean, humour is a very, very. It's always has always struck me as strange that there's not more humour in books, and there's a lot. I mean, you saw Kurt Vonnegut at the front. Yeah. Obviously, he's a bit of a inspiration in that way, but it's and maybe it's just because not everyone's comfortable writing humour because it doesn't always translate and it's hard to get right.
And humour done wrong is the worst thing.
Absolutely, and it could be what I've done as well. Some people would, it is very subjective, and some people could read that and go, "That's not funny. That's okay." But I just, it's such a human thing to laugh when things are not going well, and I just find anything that doesn't quite do that is not quite rendering a human experience in the right way. I don't think that's my kind of take. It's not always the truth, but that's the way I feel.
No, I mean, I also love the line where Bren is telling Henry the cat how much more developed he is. He's like, all that you want is a meal and a sunbeam to lie in, and then the very next line is him going, actually, I think most of what I want is a meal and a sunbeam to lie in.
That's probably it, right? That's all he really wants. Because that is a bit of a reflection of him anyway. And he is basically a bit of a...
He's a bit of a house cat.
A bit of a house cat. He's just like, I'm okay with this.
Kaylin can gallivant around the
exactly.
world.
She's the ambitious one. But he just basically wants to lie in a sunbeam.
Bren's mum, is such a beautiful, funny, silly character, and the influence and their conversations towards the end kind of they sort of circle around, I think, a lot of big things and never quite get there. But in the circling, I think both of the characters are aware of and acknowledge what they are circling and sort of the conversations they are not having. And she even says at one point, there's so many things I wished I could have told you. He says, like what? And she gives an example. Your dad said you walked like a deer. And then he goes, well, if there's so much stuff you want to tell me, then tell me. And she says, no, there's not enough time. And that's the end of the conversation. That, it's so, I don't really know how to describe how it makes me feel, that sort of relationship, especially in the back part of the book. That I don't have a question to talk about.
Well, there's but I know what you mean. It's that kind of it's almost the overwhelm of telling someone how much they mean to you at some level, right? And how much they really mean, and the sort of the things that that this mother thinks he should know, and she's obviously thinking about something that she's going to be doing pretty soon anyway. Which is the tree thing. So as an element of kind of reckoning with her own sort of history in that way, or where what's going to happen soon. But and for me, it's there's a lot of stuff that, there's a lot of stuff that remains unsaid between all of us and our loved ones, right? And I wanted their relationship to be a good one, but also one that was a bit withholding.
We had a little interruption. You were talking about the sort of relationship being beautiful, but sort of withheld.
Yeah, a bit of withholding that his mum is doing, and that's not necessarily deliberate. I think it's just more of a, as I say, there's too much.
Yeah,
there's too much feeling, and she doesn't really know what to do with it all. And just to sort of use the deer example, it's just some stupid thing that she's got in her head, but there's so much that we would love to talk to each other about and give to each other, but. Yeah.
And then there's that scene right after she arboresces when Bren is going through her drawers and he finds all of the travel guides. And and he has this moment where he realized that she could never afford to go traveling, and then he spent years going around the globe with Kaylin.
Yep.
And never thought about inviting her.
Yep. Yep.
And it's this really, he has this kind of like, you know, kind of like self-flagellation, like real kind of like anger at himself. But that, stepping back from that anger of that moment, I felt that was such a perfect encapsulation of not just his relationship with her, but the relationship with his dad earlier on. And also, we haven't talked about Miles at all, but Miles is such a sort of beautiful kind of, as you said, there's lots of axes in this book that kind of just are there and are in the background and are operating, and none of them are like always front and center, but they all kind of have these little vignettes of meaning. And Bren's relationship to people. I mean, there's the whole thing that his mum asked him, and then he asked Travis about close friends, and his brother Travis says, no, people just come and go, and I kind of like that. Which I think is kind of fun, but also very insightful, again, line. Was there, with Miles, and I guess just with kind of relationships in general in this book, they're all kind of occluded or withheld in some way, whether it's what we say to each other in terms of Bren and his mum, or whether it's what Bren chooses not to say to Kaylin for so long when she's dragging him around the world, or the like, we never see Miles and Bren be friends. We only see after Miles has disappeared, and then we find out about the arborescing, and he was one of the first, and sort of what about what about relationships made you want to write so with such restraint in terms of all the different ways you put these relationships in the book? Right?
Well, with Bren in particular, it was very much a case of him being, there's an element of being quite, I would say, almost repressed in some of his kind of his dealings there. So with Miles, it's a very early version of that as a kid, where he whether or not it's true, he thinks post all this that he was a bad friend, even though Miles was quite bad to him as well, that he wasn't asking questions. He was just someone who was there. And so there's a guilt that starts to sort of, he realises that it wasn't Miles's fault necessarily, that maybe he was also to blame in this sort of friendship. So, but because he wasn't interested enough, he wasn't giving enough of himself to Miles and at least just being kind of curious about him. And so there's an element of, I think Bren realising kind of where he sits in the world with the people he loves, right? And he doesn't probably get to that point until quite late. There's a real, as I was saying before, there's a real compassion in him that is probably untapped a little bit. He's quite cynical, but through the loss of sort of various people, he starts to, and look, when we're doing spoilers, so and Henry is really where who is the cat, who dies of old age, but that's the point where I realised that that's where he has to suddenly come to terms with all that, right? And all the loss that he's seen, and all the kind of loss that is around him. So it was very much a case of I didn't really have any other purpose other than just to sort of have him be a little bit like that, and just kind of because I think we're all naturally a bit kind of resistant to that. And as a man in the world, that can be a bit of a kind of difficult thing to sort of cope with, right? At times we don't necessarily express ourselves that well. And so I wanted to sort of mess around with that a little bit and get him to kind of, I really just wanted to ultimately make him realise what he had lost and really realise it. And when Henry sits next to him on the couch and they sleep and then he doesn't wake up, there was a moment when I wrote that scene, I actually, I had to go. I wrote the scene because I've got a couple of cats. And I've never done this before after writing anything, but I wept. I was like, I didn't weep about the mother or the father or Miles or anything. It was the cat. Because it was the letting go of for myself a little bit of a lot of that stuff. So I think in some ways I was channeling a bit of that, to be honest, but as I was writing him.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean, one of the best moments, I mean, I think I've said this about pretty much every scene we've talked about. I say one of my favourite things, one of the best moments, but because the book's amazing. But one of my favourite moments, so striking, is Bren is still in denial somewhat about various kind of moral and social aspects of the arborescence, and he goes to visit Miles or finds meets the tree that is Miles, and he goes with Kaelin, and he says to Kaelin, he's like, oh, they killed him and buried him under the tree or whatever, and then that night he goes and leans against the tree and talks to him. And it's this kind of beautiful contradiction of externally he's saying all these things in denial, kind of finding all of these other possibilities of other explanations or things, and then but the feeling is undeniable that he has when he's in the presence of Miles's tree, the redwood, I think.
Yes, he becomes a redwood.
Yeah,
yes.
And just that kind of just quiet, because I think that's so sort of quietly masculine in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sort of paradox of modern masculinity and being in the world, of this kind of having all of this anger and sort of disagreement, and also this resentment to people who leave you behind or who whatever. But then also when it's quiet, and usually when no one is watching, you have to let yourself unfurl a little bit, and sort of unlock all of the tension and all of the barriers. And I think that's what I do love about Bren is that he doesn't have kind of a very macho masculine guard, but as you say, he is quite repressed, especially at the beginning. He's very defensive.
Yeah, he
he's
is.
Very deflecting kind of person. And this sort of dismantling, mostly by external things in the world, that he undergoes, where all of these kind of things just get slowly peeled away, and then he is just left kind of very raw. But it's very beautiful because he does manage to come to terms with it.
I think so. Yeah.
At least in some respects. It's just so beautiful.
He definitely comes to terms with it as much as anyone can, right? That we lose. We have people and we lose them. We have animals and we lose them. There is much sadness and suffering in the world, but that is the world. But there are things that still grow. I mean, to use that old, forgive the pun, but it's that was kind of the idea. And I know that's using tree metaphors and everything, but it really was. Towards the end of the book, I realized what I was probably doing was writing about what we do in the aftermath of losing, and what does grow in the aftermath of that. It's very much about that, I think, more than anything else.
Sort of a very final thing to touch on before we start to wrap things up, to go back to Voidstar for a moment, because I can't stay away, because I love them. And you realise that you've now inadvertently committed to making the Voidstar comic series.
Oh, it would just be a dream. I actually was genuinely thinking about at least a short story collection, but I just don't know if I can pull that off. But
no, please.
I mean, I could.
We'll find you some illustrators. We'll get you. We'll
work it out. Yep.
Because I need. You don't understand how much I need.
Voidstar. Look, I would love to. I think it's a universe that I could see myself actually developing. So
but there's that sort of there's a scene late in the book, in Miles' letter to Bren, actually, where Miles just writes Voidstar 273, which is the issue, and it's the issue where Voidstar turns himself into a seedling in a futuristic city, and then becomes a tree, and then all the comic strips are black, the panels are black, because you just get vague sensations and descriptions.
That whole premise came from, and it's one of the reasons maybe I've actually had this in my head for a long time anyway, and I've said it before, so if people have heard this before, whatever, I'll say it again. There was a Choose Your Own Adventure book when I was growing up. I was into that in the 80s, really into Choose Your Own Adventure books. And there was one in which, and we all know how they go, usually the endings are 99% bad.
Yes.
There's one or two good ones that are good. This one in particular had you, and one of the bad endings was that you end up as a tree, and it basically suggested that your whole consciousness is done, so you're done, and it was blank at that point. So you are a tree, the end. And I'm like, part of that was me as a 7-year-old or something going, no. That's not right. Trees are just something else. We just don't know. You, writer, haven't worked out what that is. That's fine. But that also infused in that sort of Voidstar comic a little bit to sort of go, well, and that is, again, the black panels or the panels that are sort of blacked out is kind of a bit of an ode to that, this idea that, people think that's nothing.
Yeah.
But it's not just something we probably can't render in an image or text, right?
Yeah.
It's just something completely different,
Yeah.
completely alien to us. But yes, not sure where I was going with that, but that's where it came from anyway. Yeah.
I love that. I can totally imagine myself coming across the same page and being like, no, tell me about what being a tree is like.
Yeah, what is that like?
This sounds pretty cool.
This is another book. Let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I think we're pretty much out of time. Is there anything else you wanted to say on the book, or?
I just wanted to say that was a wonderful discussion because we actually got to talk about the book as a whole, and I just enjoyed that so much. That was just wonderful. Thank you. Nothing really else to talk about. I mean, I think there's plenty there to people to have.
Do you want to maybe tell people why they should also read Hovering?
Hovering, sure. Yeah, Hovering is about, as I've been saying, a city that isn't sure it should be there. So it's effectively a woman comes home after being away for many, many years, to a place in southern Victoria, or a city in southern Victoria that is effectively moving. So overnight, streets change direction and buildings end up somewhere else. And that's kind of the start.
Cool.
Spoilers if we go too much farther forward, but it's really about that one in that sense is about a couple of sisters who are kind of estranged and trying to sort of get back together a little bit.
Okay.
But why should you read it? Well, because it's got a similar vibe.
Yeah.
If you like that, if you want to know a bit more about Voidstar or Catamaran Davy, he's in there too.
Yes. I'd also expect a trilogy of Catamaran Davy movies.
He might appear again. Who knows?
Thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Meridian Australis Roundtable. You can find us at meridianaustralis.au. You can buy collections of our short fiction, the latest of which, Crux Volume 1, has a wonderful praise quote by some author named Rhett Davis.
It's a wonderful anthology. You should all read it.
And that was a lot of fun to put together. That you can buy that at Readings as well. You can buy that from our website. You can follow us on Instagram. I don't know if
I am on Instagram, yes.
Instagram,
but that's the lot. Yeah, just Instagram.
Instagram.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for listening, everybody. See you next time.